Tell me, where did you grow up? In what kind of circumstances was your childhood?
So I grew up in Ploiești. Ploiești is a city quite next to Bucharest. I was born in 1977. So 4 months after a big earthquake in Romania. And it was quite a difficult time for my family because the sister of my mother, who was 23, she died in the earthquake. Ploiești was an industrial city in the communist times, so it was quite a big industrial city. The oil industry was quite productive, I could say. Of course, I grew up in a block of flats, in a communist block of flats, a very typical one. We were living at the 8th floor. And I remember a lot of times that the light was off and we had to go to the 8th floor and then go again down. So it was a little bit difficult. I also remember doing my homework in semi-dark, let's say. But of course, I have mixed feelings because I was a child, and I guess it's always to reconstruct politically a period when you grew up as a child. My parents are teachers, and they had to travel a lot in the country to teach in various villages because it was the politics that a lot of teachers were going to various parts of Romania and were teaching there. It was a difficult period for everyone. It was a period that we didn't talk in our houses, in our homes, because our parents were afraid that we could say something at school, and maybe we could say something which was inappropriate. So they were very, very. It was a how to say a state of silence, and at the same time a state of vigilance, because everyone had to be very careful what to say, what not to say, what to hide. Of course, I didn't perceive it like that, but I had this feeling that something was always hidden. That when I went to some friends of mine, there were things and threats that were always hidden. But I guess I was lucky. I could grow up in a time like this, and also immediately after this, in the 90s, which were also a very confusing period. It was a period when everyone was very hopeful that things will completely change. And of course, they changed in a way, but they didn't change in a lot of other ways. But it was a lot of hope those days. And I remember my parents, who were very enthusiastic about the future. And I remember my grandparents, who were not so enthusiastic because they had also, let's say, a more politically engaged perspective. I guess so. Yes, the 90s were interesting and confusing, and of course, we were happy as kids that we were not obliged to use uniforms at school, and that we could be dressed no matter how. But of course, after some years, the confusion, I guess, emphasized, and a certain feeling of insecurity. People became more and more insecure, because they had no fixed jobs, they had no very fixed perspective. There was a lot of insecurity, and this could be felt politically and economically. I see an attempt of trying to get rid of our past, to get rid of explaining it, of understanding it, of seeing the good parts and, of course, the bad parts. It's like, I don't know, it's like we are rewriting a history with a lot of gaps. It is as everything now when we try to talk or to write about communism, everything is conceived like very extremely bad. And I think it's dangerous not to reflect politically on the history you have, because you will lose some big parts. And I don't agree with this attitude of condemning everything and trying to efface everything. I think it's important also for my generation to be more lucid and to be more reflexive when we try to understand, in fact, emotionally and politically the period.
Were you first drawn towards writing or towards theatre specifically? How did you discover those two sides?
I followed the classes of philology. In fact, I went to philology because I was very fond of literature. I enjoyed a lot writing and reading, and I felt more, how to say, related to going to philology. And when I was in the third year of philology, one of my teachers, who was also leading a very important newspaper in Romania, Cultural Observer. He invited some of the students, some of us, he invited us to write in the newspaper. He was extremely generous, and he asked me what I would like to write about. And because I was following quite closely what was happening in the theater field, I said I would like to write about theater. And I began, in fact, writing different articles, doing interviews, trying to approach the theater field. So that's how I, let's say, approach theater, through writing about theater. And then there was an important Romanian, let's say, movement created by some directors and also playwrights who were my age that time. It's called Drama Acum. And it had a very big influence in Romanian theater because it encouraged a lot of playwrights to write, and in fact it encouraged this teamwork, the fact that a playwright and the director could develop a play, and they were also having a competition. I sent a script to them, not with my name because I was knowing them, all of them, and I sent them the script. It was not a finished one, and one of the director chose to work with me, and it is the director I'm still working with. So after 13 years, we have a very strong collaboration. His name is Radu Apostol, and he was a very important, let's say, person and artist in my becoming, because I was coming from philology, and of course I was enjoying writing, but some very important things lacked. So working with Radu, I tried to understand what meant to write for theater, to write for actors, to understand what is a dramatic situation, what is a theater event. Of course, I knew this. I had some notions, but they were more connected to the literary field. And little by little, I began approaching to this, and then I also won a competition for the best play of the year. with a play of mine, which was also staged at the National Theatre, and I began working with Alexandra Bada. She was then staying in Bucharest. Now she lives in Paris, and she also writes. And I began also a very good collaboration with her. So and then for me, writing for theater was very related to the people I knew and to the people I met, because I met some passionate directors and passionate people who really believed in the dramatic text and who were very eager in searching for new forms, for new ideas, for new, let's say, tactics of writing. So because I guess I continued because I also met them, Radu Apostol, Alexandra Bada, then David Schwartz, and I felt I could develop something new together. And this was very, very, very valuable for me.
My impression is that for you, politics and theatre and writing are inseparable.
Yes, yes, you are right. You are right. And every single play, in fact, I tried to emphasize a sort of political conscious, because, of course, in the beginning, you are not very conscious, or some things are not very, let's say, not clear, but are still, you don't understand them very good. But yes, I tried with every piece to engage in searching, let's say, and understanding a political phenomenon, and in asking questions why all these were possible in fact at that times, and what are the influences, and how you can write relating to this political conscious, and trying to not to, let's say, clarify, because I don't think clarify is, of course it's important, but sometimes it's more important to how to say, to go deep down into some stereotypes or some cliches, and to try to work with them, and to try to work with this, let's say, political surface that is there, and you try to emphasize.
What do you hope that audiences will take from your political theatre work?
I hope they will take some questions, and I hope they will emphasize some points or some perspectives. I'm very fond of how to say, deconstructing, let's say, mainstream perspectives and emphasizing some hidden perspectives. So this game of confronting political perspectives, and trying also to not to how to say, not only to show things, but to see how the things were possible like this, why we took them like this, and how we could let's say, rediscover them. So let's writing is also, I don't know, rediscovering some lost perspectives, or some lost or hidden arguments, and these hidden parts are something that I'm very interested, and the quality of my writing is also very preoccupied with, let's say, rhythm, and a certain way of narrating histories that are not like in the history books, are not like mainstream histories, or the histories that are most of the times taught.
Yes, you've written several pieces about marginalized groups, about Roma, about women, and so on. And there's a strong sense, looking at that work, that of wanting to amplify, diversify the range of voices that are heard in public life? Is that a
Mhm. Mhm. Amplify, I like a lot amplify, because sometimes they are there. Maybe people have heard of them, but they are not, let's say, quite obvious. And I think it's also an exercise of repositioning. In fact, every time to reposition the perspective, and with every text, I try. Sometimes I can, sometimes I cannot, but I try to find for every topic a certain way of writing, and a certain way of amplifying, let's say, the content of the topic through the form of the writing. How can I reimagine a certain narrative? How can I tell a story, inventing, let's say, a form of writing, or trying to emphasize sometimes the rhythm, sometimes a new form of grammar, sometimes yes. So I also try to see how some topics in fact call for some new ways of writing.
Do you think that there are dangers in bringing marginalized voices, vulnerable people onto the public stage, as it were? And if so, how do you try to avoid the dangers?
I think, and I became more and more conscious, because in the beginning I was not very conscious of this, and I think it's also important to create spaces for these marginalized people, and to give to understand that their voice and their narratives are very important, and to involve them in the documentation part, sometimes to invite them to perform. I became more and more conscious that the stage has to be more and more flexible, and more open. And of course, this is something that in the beginning, of course, I had some intuitions, but for instance, now I think that in my writing, I have to write more and more about women's perspective. Of course, in all my pieces, in all my plays, I have characters, I have girls, I have women, but I became in the last years more and more important that their voices have to be more present, and then that we need to work on a dramaturgy that give them space, and give them, let's say, proper narrative. I also wrote a piece about the communities of miners in a former mono-industrial region in Romania. Every time I do such a research, or I do such a piece, I try to go back to the communities I documented, because I think it's important to meet again with them, and to reconnect, and to see how the narratives they so generously offered us, how they can turn back, and how this change really brings something. I really believe in a local theater, in local themes, and in the power of finding those local stories that, of course, if they are very emotional and very, how to say, strong, will have also a universal impact. But I really believe in trying to write locally, and to emphasize our local stories.
Two of the common complaints about political theatre are, one is that um, it's more interested in ideology than in art, and the other is that it only speaks to people who agree with it anyway.
Mm.
How do you respond to those?
I think they are both to be thought about. Because of course sometimes also because I don't know, in Romania also because political theater is done in independent spaces, more in independent spaces. Sometimes there is, like you said, the people who know us and the people who agree with us follow us. And what I try with my colleagues and the people I work with is going also in different other places. We are not performing only in let's say theater. We are also performing in various other spaces. For instance, with the colleagues in Replica Theater in Bucharest, which I found it like we found it like 4 years ago. We always try to go with our performances in schools. We always try to go in with our performances in small cities, in villages, in places that theater is not so, also because we want in a way to enlarge the audience and to see how we can understand and how they can relate to it. Because yes, sometimes it is this, that you do theater for a small group, that of course they are your friends and your friends agree with you. But I think the more we can how to say, enlarge the audience. For me, going to schools is extremely important, and I learned a lot from the contact with the kids I worked with, and from the contact with the teenagers that saw the pieces, the performances, and asked questions. For me, in school, going to perform in school is a wonderful source of learning.
And I know you've written a lot with children in mind as well.
I tried to write a lot with children in mind. I documentation is extremely important for me, and I really try to give to give documentation a lot of time, because sometimes it's the core of writing. It gives you so many perspectives, and it helps you understand the world you are connecting with. Sometimes it gives you the concept of the writing, because there is a word, or there is a phrase, that sometimes sentence that someone says in an interview, that really lightens up the whole process of writing. And every time I write a piece, I try to document a lot. And if I write it for teenagers, for instance, bad kids, a play about bullying, I tried to have some workshops with teenagers about bullying, how they face it, how they talk about it, how they don't talk about it. And it really, really helped me a lot in the process of writing.
Fabulamundi is a European project. You've some of your plays have been translated and performed abroad. How do you feel they translate into another context, another, not just another language, but another situation where with different references and cultural norms? How does that work for you?
I think translation is a rewriting, and it gives you a new understanding of the piece. And sometimes when I saw, for instance, I saw the play Bad Kids at Parkauer in Berlin, I rediscovered it. And there were some parts that really illuminated in a way, and were more, for instance, poetical, or some parts that were more, let's say, brutal in a way. I guess translation makes the piece grow, and makes the piece reconnect to another context. And because when another team in another country, when it approaches your play, sorry, it comes with the context they are living in, and with the questions they are confronting with. So I think it was very important that our plays were translated, and some of them met new context and met new themes.
As a Romanian of your generation, you've been through a lot of changes and upheaval, and now Romania is a member of the European Union. And I have to say, the last time I was there near Cluj, I was starting to see motorways being built, that almost like the new Europe, the symbol of unification, I suppose. I wonder what Europe means to you, both as an idea and as a political entity, and what you see the future for Romania in this context.
I see. I guess we have to question a lot of principles and values, and to see how valid, in fact, they are. I saw some contexts also in the pandemic period that really made me feel very, how to say, annoyed and at the same time confused, because it was full pandemic and full lockdown, let's say. We were not allowed to leave houses. And I saw in the airport in Cluj, because you mentioned Cluj, thousands of workers who were transported to Germany, who were transported to Austria, and they traveled in very bad conditions. And I guess the whole situation. And when they arrived there, they were treated not so good. So I guess we have to reconsider all these principles of solidarity and the principle of taking care, because sometimes I have, for instance, in this period, I was very disappointed. Of course, I knew about the migration situation because I documented it and I wrote about it. And I was happy that a lot of people became more conscious of the lives of these workers, and what meant in fact to be a migrant, and how these people lived. Because also in Romania, we didn't have too many, let's say, investigations about this. And all of a sudden, they appeared in prime time. And I guess the crisis makes the most vulnerable more vulnerable. And I think this kind of vulnerability and solidarity and all these principles that we hear, and they should in a way, we should try to reconsider them, and to see how valuable they are in times of big crisis.
There is a big gap between the rhetoric of solidarity and human rights and equality and the reality on which our societies are built.
Exactly. And in poor countries, in countries where I don't know, a lot of people have no social and political status, they are extremely precarious. All these things become more and more problematic, and we see that the gaps become more and more deep. In fact, deeper and deeper, and this is a problem.
Finally, this is a difficult question to ask you, because we're all living in such uncertainty, as you've said, but do you have projects that you're thinking about? What do you see as the future of your work in the world that we're now living in?
I told you that we succeeded in having a theater space in Bucharest, an independent one. We are 7 artists, and I'm really afraid that we will not be able to keep the space for more than 1 year, because in Romania the cultural funds did not exist. So for the independent sector, they really didn't give anything. And a lot of artists, I talk with a lot of artists who are completely independent, so they are not employed in other, I don't know, theaters, and they are really, really afraid that they will not be able to continue. And of course, it's a pity because we more and more in the last years in Romania, a lot of spaces disappeared. And you know, when a space disappears, it's a lot of artists and a lot of work and cultural vision and political vision, which in a way disappears. And I'm really afraid that in the next years, the independent spaces, one by one, will disappear. I hope I'm not right, but the situation, the cultural situation in Romania for the independent sector is really, really bad. And in fact, you see that the Ministry of Culture, even if we had, let's say, some discussions or some meetings, they really didn't do anything, as if this sector didn't exist.
I think that's true of many countries where particularly for the freelance workers, on who even the official cultural organizations depend. And I think what small progress we've made in having a more equal and diverse cultural workforce is likely to go back, because as you say, the pandemic hits the most vulnerable hardest.
Exactly. Exactly, and for instance, you see a whole sector that is living very poorly. There are people who are living from one project to another, and there is the whole independent sector. In fact, can apply to one fund. So there is one cultural, let's say, national fund that all the organizations and independent artists can apply. And we really think that if this fund disappears, the whole independent sector will break up completely because it will not be able to continue. And for me, it's also a problem of I don't know how this is designed because we designed it as surviving. And I guess it was, in a way, now when I look back, it was a wrong tactic because surviving is. It can go very fast. It can go very far. Surviving is like I don't know, preparing for tomorrow, but for the day after tomorrow, you don't know. And I guess these surviving tactics bring a lot of precarity and unstable situations.